Welcome back, everyone. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the OC012 application, and what I've done here is I've opened up my iPad to the OC012 app. Now the first screen that we're going to see when we open this up is the settings page. Inside the settings page, the first thing we want to do is enter the username and password of the customer project that we have created. You'll see the username OC012 with the password that we created. This was the first steps in the training that we did when we talked about the manager account. This is that customer that we created. This is your customer's iPad, your demo setup. Enter that information and move on to your settings. So with the settings, we can do an audible sound on tap. We can do a vibrate on tap for iPhones and certain Android devices. We can prevent system locks. So that means that your iPad will not go to a lock screen. Instead, it'll stay open, stay active. If you want to salvage battery life, we can prevent that system lock, but we can also dim the screen on idle. So this will turn the brightness down when it would be going to that normal lock screen. The other reason that prevent system lock would be great if you're doing this in a wall mount, that this is always on, always active, you can keep the screen from ever going to that lock screen where the customer would then have to unlock the iPad to control anything within their setup. We can show the connection status. This is going to give us a few different colors, green, white, red, or yellow, and that indicates some issues that we're having connectivity-wise to the OC012's hardware to our network-controlled devices. And we'll talk about those differences when we get inside the app. We can also disable auto discovery. This setting you do want to leave. Auto discovery is a good way to identify the OC012's hardware and some network-controlled devices that are already connected to your network, so you don't have to manually configure all of your different IP addresses. We can also lock the settings, so if you don't want your customer to have access to these settings, you can prevent them from changing any IP addresses, resyncing the account when you've made changes that you haven't fully verified or tested yet. We can come up with our own PIN code that's unique to us, that we know exactly what it is, and the customer will not have any clue as to what it might be to get into the actual settings of the account. Once you have all your settings in place, we'll sync. This takes you to the sync page where you then choose your handset. Now when we change the name of the handset, this is where it comes into play. We want to know which handset to sync with. You can see I've created a couple different handsets here. So we're going to choose Scott's iPad to pull that information that we created inside the builder. This is going to pull all the information from the cloud, all of your programming, all of your devices, and once the sync is complete, you're then going to want to assign your unassigned devices. We'll choose yes, and it takes us to our device screen, which shows us all the control devices that we have imported for this project. You can see the list here has a couple different options, things that we incorporated for matrix switchers, uploading our own custom devices. This is just a full list of everything that we have within that project. We're going to assign a few of the devices here, the things that we have set up in our demo showroom for you to take a look at for the training purpose. So we're going to start with our Integra RS-232. This takes us to what we call our device config page. The first option we see is device not connected, tap to configure. We also see the actual device, the vendor, the model. We can also use this for volume control, and what we mean by that is using the hard buttons on the handset itself to control the volume of our Integra receiver, of your television, but you can actually use the volume up and down buttons of the actual physical handset. If you're doing anything with two-way feedback, you'll see the feedbacks listed at the bottom. Now to actually assign the gateway, we'll tap to configure. If you're doing anything with auto discovery, you would see those devices here. Now what we're going to do is add a new gateway. We see the device, we see the type of connection, and we also see the configuration. Now where it says new gateway, I'm going to rename this to my Integra gateway. And then we're going to edit our IP address. Now you will see the beginning characters of the network that you're connected to, but if you're doing anything through DNS or an external IP address, you can delete this by tapping the small X here and typing in your DNS server name, your full external IP address, or just manually configure the IP address if you're going to be setting everything as static. Now the static IP addresses do have to be configured within the hardware itself, so we are inputting the IP address of the current hardware that's connected to the network. So identify our IP address here. And then I'll hit done, check over everything, and hit save at the top. Now we see our assigned device underneath all of our other unassigned devices. So next we'll move on to the Apple TV. We see the same config page. We'll configure our gateway. We'll add the new gateway here. With your IR3 hardware, we see channels for 1, 2, and 3. We just want to know where the emitter is plugged in. Our Apple TV is plugged into 3, so we tap on 3, we see a check mark. We'll save that. Moves us on to our next screen. We see the 3 separate channels. When you're setting up your gateways, you want to have a single IP address per hardware. So if you're doing zone 2 and 3 control of your receivers, you want to make sure that both zone 1 and zone 2 are on a single gateway within the application. Multiple devices, single gateway. You don't want to create multiple gateways with the same IP address. That will cause conflict within the app and your network. So single gateway with multiple devices. Same way works with the IR3s. So we'll choose channel 1. We'll add our device, which is our Samsung TV, and hit the plus sign. Now if we want to add multiple devices, if you're doing a dual emitter, we can add that second device. You can add a third device if you're doing a blaster. The blaster does get connected to channel 3 and has to be adjusted within the settings of the hardware page itself. Channel 2 is our Panasonic Blu-ray player. And once we have everything confirmed, we'll change the name of the gateway. And we'll adjust our IP address. Save our settings. We see our new assigned devices. I'm going to move on to the Lutron module. For devices that are controlled over RS-232 as well as IP with the same protocol, you're going to have the question, how are you going to control this? Whether it's IP or serial. In this case, we are going to choose IP. We'll add our new gateway. Again, we rename this. Adjust our IP address. We see the port number. For your network controlled devices, we need to identify the port that we're communicating through. For some devices, we're going to require username and password. And Lutron does require a password and a username, which will be given to you as part of a PDF at the end of this course. For protocol, we can do TCP or UDP, depending on the device. And if you're doing anything with Wake on LAN, we can enable that with entering the MAC address of the unit itself. We'll look at the FOSCAM. FOSCAM requires HTTP, and you will see the 3 methods for HTTP, get, post, and put. Depending on the hardware you're using, if you find it from our database, chances are the proper network or HTTP gateway is going to be pre-configured for you. It's not going to have the IP address, but it's going to have the port number, the proper method for HTTP. If you're building your own devices, you're going to need to identify the proper port, proper method, the username and password, and just provide that information as you create these devices. Once you have your devices assigned, we're going to move on to our gateways page. So we'll tap on the gateways here. We'll see all the different gateways that we have set up. And you can see where renaming these gateways comes into play. If you had new gateway 1, 2, 3, or 4, you would not be able to identify what devices are actually connected to these different gateways. At the top right, we can edit and delete gateways. So we can choose the red minus sign or the green plus sign to add gateways. If we're going to add an iTunes gateway, you can see that we get a 4-digit code. This requires us to then open the iTunes on our PC, our Mac Mini, and pair the actual handset to that library. Once you have all your gateways configured, you check the IP addresses. We want to go back to our sync page, and we want to choose the option to backup gateways. When we back up these gateways, it's going to save this configuration to the cloud, to the username that we've created on this project. So if you're doing that multi-handset in that home, you then can just restore gateways to bring in all that information back to the handset for those assigned devices and those IP addresses. That way you're not going through that same effort every single time you sync this handset. Once your gateways are set up, once your settings are confirmed, we can go to our panels and choose main to take us to the main page that we have created. We see our new background, we see our icons, we see our power buttons, and also at the bottom right, we see this little radio beacon. It's green beacon here. This is that connection status that we had mentioned inside the settings. If you see green, that means that your IP addresses, your network are properly configured, that this handset is communicating with the hardware. If you see red, that means an IP address is incorrect, or your handset is on a different network than that of the hardware. If you see white, that means that there's either no control devices on this page, or the gateway has not been configured at all. And if you see orange or yellow, that indicates that one or more gateways on that page have not been configured. So you're going to have some green, some red. By tapping on the beacon, it pulls up a drawer so you can actually see those different control devices. We can see that our demo, which is our IR control for Panasonic and Samsung, are properly connected. I can close that drawer by swiping down, and then I see my interface where I can choose the different activities within the project. Now with that blank button we created, we're going to change the background, change the text color. You can see how quickly the variable responds. There's our new background, and there's our new text color. We can go on to choose our Apple TV. So we see our Apple TV page, same lower right hand corner, we get the icon for our Apple TV. We see that our TV and the receiver are both connected. Minimize that. Then I can choose Blu-ray from my left drawer. We can use our volume controls on the right. You'll notice as I tap a button in the lower left hand corner, I also get a 2 green arrow flash. That indicates that that device and that command are being properly sent. If you tap on a button and you see red arrows, that means that that device is not properly connected to that gateway, or the command itself is corrupt. Choose our lighting page. We'll see our thermostat as well as our lights. Turn off our switch. Lower the dim. Change this to cool. Open and close our shades, our blinds, our drapes. And we can also go to our blank page to see our feedback. We see our camera. We see the different feedbacks currently on the page. We can swipe over. We can view our URL window. So we can see our OnControl's website or your company's website for you to embed in your customer projects. We can use our Sonos launch to take us into the Sonos app. And then I can return back into OnControls. We can use the variables as well that we created to change our mute image, as well as open and close our drawer. Now if we have to make any changes, we want to go into our panels to make these changes. We tap on the panels option inside our navigation bar, and this is where we see the PIN code to enter our settings. Type in our PIN code, and now we're back to our panels. We can also go to our gateways and make the changes that we see necessary. That does wrap up things with the application. At this time, what we'd like you to do, if you followed along and you've gone through all the hands-on exercises as we have gone through the modules, you're going to submit your username and password via email to training@oncontrols.com.